Hello again. Thank you for coming to track 2 again. I'd just like to say a special thanks to Luke and Drakeford for stepping in at the last minute. As you'll notice from the main programme, we had to remove one of the talks for reasons you asked about some of you are. I'm not quite sure what the captain might have got crossed, but I'm not sure. So Luke's going to step in. I'm not quite sure what the talk's about. There's a running theme today where I don't quite know what the talk's about. So I'll hand over to Luke. So you might should be good to go. No.
Can you hear me? Am I on?
I think so.
Yeah. Very good. Okay. Good afternoon, guys. As we just said, I'm not Aaron Stevens Taylor. I'm not doing a talk about root BSides. Instead, I'm going to be talking about securing mobile apps in hostile environments. If this doesn't sound like it floats your boat, then that's cool. If you want to head to track 1-3, I won't be offended. But otherwise, I'll get started now. So, what is the problem? The problem is one that software developers, application developers have seen a lot over the years, which is that they spend a lot of time and effort building applications, putting together their nice source code, and then building a binary which they have to release for their users to use. The problem is, once you've put your application together and distributed it to your users, they're free to do whatever they like with it. They're free to start pulling it apart, they're free to start modifying it, redistributing it. And this is really what I mean by a hostile environment. I mean, it's an environment that you can assume nothing about. The only thing that you can really assume is that someone will probably, at some point, try to maliciously analyze your application. So the solution I propose is to build hardened apps which identify when they're being inspected in such a way, and then halt execution entirely. So who am I? I'm Luke Drakeford. Again, sorry, not Aaron Stevens Taylor. And I have been working with MWR for a couple of years. A lot of that time has been spent working in the software development life cycle with clients, helping them to harden their mobile applications from the kinds of analysis techniques and attacks that I'm going to describe. So hopefully you'll be thinking about answers to the following questions, or maybe have answers to the following questions by the end of this presentation. What are the impacts of distributing insufficiently hardened apps, and how can apps defend themselves from the kind of stuff that I'm going to describe? So a quick overview. I'll start off by talking about mobile threats, the sort of state of the mobile malware landscape. Then I'm going to take an imaginary application and start my way along a sort of attack methodology. And then I'm going to take the same application, we're going to add some hardening measures, then we're going to go through the same methodology, and then we're going to see how to compare from an attacker's perspective. Then we're going to analyze the two and see what happens. So to start off, mobile threats. Typically, when someone is asked what is the most vulnerable operating system, or what operating system has the highest infection rate, Windows usually pops to mind. However, there was a report in 2014 by Motive Security Labs that monitored the infection rate on Android hosts and Windows hosts, and they came up with some interesting statistics showing that actually Android and Windows were sort of head-to-head for infection rate. And at some points, Android actually took over from Windows. Although there was a little bit of controversy regarding these statistics, they definitely illustrate that mobile malware is a thing, it is happening, and in some cases proliferates more than people might think. So according to Kaspersky, 60% of malware has financial objectives. Targeted malware is pretty rare, but we have seen some examples. There was Fake Token. This was a piece of malware which had, which based on a user's desktop and attacked a web application for somebody's banking application. They'd also have a mobile counterpart that sat in their phone and listened for those two-factor authentication tokens in order to attempt to make payments seamlessly without the user knowing, by sort of listening in on their SMSs. There's a lot of impersonation applications. We've seen German banking applications impersonated and South Korean banking applications. I'm sure there's plenty of others. There was SVPeng. This was a weird one. This piece of malware would attempt to fingerprint the devices that it had infected. It would search on devices looking for package names that were hard-coded in the malware, which were to do with financial applications, banking applications, stuff like that. It would then send that information back to its server. It never appeared to do anything with this information, but it's definitely a worrying trend that attackers are thinking about it, and it's definitely on their agenda. Like I said, although targeted malware is pretty rare, it's important to realise that financial applications are desirable targets. When targeted attacks do happen, financial apps are certainly going to be the ones that they come after, especially if your goal is to make money or to steal user credentials in order to make money. As such, it's important to keep the level of security, to keep the bar high, and to try and deter attackers and not get lax and fall behind and leave your applications unhardened. Also, it's important to realise that apps can't be retroactively hardened or patched. Yes, if you identify a vulnerability in your application and you update it, you send a new one to the App Store, you download it, it's all fixed, that's awesome. If you release an application that hasn't been hardened effectively and someone reverse engineers it and understands how your application works, they've got that information forever. You can then harden your application, but the knowledge of how it functions under the hood is exactly the same. That information is lost, unless you want to completely re-implement your application, which I doubt many people do. So, this is an acknowledged problem. Insufficient binary protections is listed in OWASP's top 10 mobile threats. And they say that not having sufficient hardening measures makes way for people to reverse engineer your application, to modify your application, redistribute it. This is where sort of intellectual property theft comes in, and bypass security controls, potentially conduct further attacks against your assets. So broadly, we have two kinds of attacks. Less advanced attacks, these are the kind of ones that we see at the moment. The goal to steal money or users' financial data in order to steal money. In order to do this kind of thing, they are phishing users, popping up and saying, you know, I'm a legit application, please download me, which is a piece of malware. Or they may impersonate applications, dress themselves up to look like your banking application and lure users into putting in their credentials. Or maybe there's some malware which might exploit low-hanging fruit vulnerabilities like stealing information from the disk, or not stealing, but taking information from the disk, which shouldn't be there. More advanced attacks, well, the goal is exactly the same. It's to steal money or users' financial data. However, more advanced attacks are likely to see attackers reverse engineering your applications to try and identify vulnerabilities, which they could then package into malware, distribute the malware, which would exploit the vulnerability and complete their objective. Also, more worryingly, attackers might modify client applications in order to facilitate further attacks against an organization's infrastructure or its server, where the really valuable assets are. It's all in one pot. That's where all the data is that attackers want to get. These are the kind of attacks that I'm going to be considering in this presentation, and I consider them in sort of two broad scenarios. The first scenario is this one where I said you reverse engineer to find vulnerabilities, make malware and distribute it. I'm going to call that the mobile client scenario. This is where you're just attacking the mobile app and nothing else. And then modifying a client application in order to carry out attacks against the server, maybe sending arbitrary requests to the server, fuzzing it, whatever. And I'm going to call that the mobile server sort of scenario. So here we have a kill chain, and a kill chain in the context of this presentation is really just a high-level set of steps, a methodology that an attacker would take to carry out that scenario that we said. This here is a sort of set of steps for the mobile client scenario, that first one that I said. Talking about the kill chain, the further down you move along these steps, or the further down the attacker moves down these steps, the more of a risk they're posing to an organization or a company. The closer they are to the bottom, the more likely they are to complete their objectives and ultimately steal money, steal user data. When attacking the mobile client, they follow a set of steps such as reconnaissance, where they identify some vulnerability in the app, weaponization, where they create a piece of malware. They'll then distribute it, maybe via a phishing campaign, gets downloaded, it exploits the vulnerability, and they complete their objective. Our second scenario was the mobile server. Here we have a kill chain for the mobile server. And the first two steps are very similar to the previous steps. They involve reconnaissance and weaponization against the mobile client, where instead of identifying vulnerabilities, this time we're now looking to identify where some security control is in place, and weaponization, we're then disabling that security control to facilitate further attacks against the server. Once you've gone through those first two steps, you're then free to move into a traditional web service testing methodology or web application assessment against the web service that the mobile client uses. You can move through reconnaissance, weaponization, delivery, but this time you're now doing it against the server, the bit where all the really good stuff is. As I'm sure you've seen, the first two steps are exactly the same. If we can slow down or stop attackers in this stage, we stand to gain quite a lot. In those first two steps, I'm going to be talking about reverse engineering, debugging, hooking and patching, which I'm going to go through in a moment. So let's consider an application, MWR Pay. MWR Pay is an imaginary application that doesn't exist, but it allows users to pay for online purchases, subscriptions, transfer money to one another, sort of the normal procedures of, say, a banking application. It has two-factor authentication. We enforce a good password policy. There's various custom encryption on top of SSL, and it obviously has a server counterpart. Overall, it's a pretty secure application. What we're going to do now is sort of go through those reconnaissance and weaponization steps in our heads and just see how an attacker fares. At the bottom of each of these sections, I've got a perceived effort by an attacker. This is really just sort of drawn from experience, and it's quite hard to quantify. So we start off with reverse engineering. This is where we take the application binary and we try and get it back into some form of human-readable code. In the case of Android, which is written in Java, this is very easy, and it is possible to take an application and get it back to somewhere near the source code that was used to originally build the app. In something like iOS, this is definitely a lot harder because you'll be analysing machine code. However, a lot of attackers are quite familiar with analysing this machine code, and there's obviously very good tools for visualising it, and so it definitely doesn't stop attackers from conducting reverse engineering. And for this reason, I've given it an effort of 1 out of 5. This is something that a lot of attackers are very familiar with, as I'm sure you know. So now we've reverse engineered the application. Maybe we have identified where some security controls are in place, or maybe even identified a vulnerability in the process. We want to start interacting with the application at runtime. We want to do some more dynamic stuff. In order to do that, we'll probably need high privileges on the device. So what we're going to do as an attacker, I'm going to take my device and I'm going to run a root exploit. These exploits are usually freely available on the internet. They're usually pretty easy to use, point and click, to the point where there are lots of sort of non-technical mobile users out there that are rooting their phones. It's really quite simple. And for this reason, I'll give it an effort of 1 out of 5 for an attacker. Now, as we're still in reconnaissance, we're kind of moving into weaponization, we're going to start debugging the application. This is where we can sort of analyze the application at runtime. We can see some of the sensitive routines as they run, maybe some of our custom encryption ones that we were talking about before. We can see comparisons that are happening inside the application. We can really get a feel for how stuff is working inside the app. This is definitely a lot more of an involved process than just statically analysing some code and reverse engineering. However, lots of people that are involved in software development and lots of attackers are very familiar with this process, which is why I give it an effort of 2 out of 5. So now we're really into the sort of weaponization section of those kill chains. This is when we've now sort of discovered where some security control is in place, and we want to start modifying the application to disable it so that we can have an application that does what we want it to do to start attacking the server. In order to do that, we might hook the application. This is where we alter the program flow of the application to do what we want it to do. If we take an example of, say, an SSL pinning routine that says, is this certificate legit? Yes or no, we can now just replace it with, yes, the certificate is legit, continue, let's not worry about it anymore. There are publicly available tools for this purpose. It is definitely a more involved process than debugging. However, these tools are very well documented, and there's a variety of them. And for that reason, I'm giving it a 2 out of 5. It's the same as the debugging steps. Finally, if hooking didn't do the job, and this is definitely more applicable on something like an iOS application, you may want to start tampering with the binary. This is where we just start overwriting sections of the application where we think there's some security control in order to disable it. This is definitely not something that's particularly easy to do, especially in order to get it working exactly how you want to get it working and the application not just crashing whenever you launch it. It requires some decent knowledge of the operating systems and definitely a decent knowledge of the instruction set used in order to build your replacement code to patch over the binary with. And this is where the sort of intellectual property theft stages happen. And for those reasons, I've given it an effort of 3 out of 5. So, we're now at the end of our reconnaissance step. And what has an attacker achieved? What have we achieved? Well, we've gained an understanding of the custom protocols. We've understood those custom crypto routines, whether we did that by reverse engineering or debugging the application. In some cases, we may have found vulnerabilities. And we have modified the application. We're now in a position where we can start assessing their servers and start assessing the bits that we really care about, what the good stuff is. I've sort of summed up the effort here, that's not really relevant right now. So let's consider another application. This time we have some of those hardening measures in place that I was talking about earlier on. We have root checking, we now have checks for if we're being debugged, if we're being hooked, or if we've maybe been tampered or patched. And there's also some source code obfuscation as well. Let's go through reconnaissance and weaponization just like we did before, and then we'll see how they compare. So let's start off with reverse engineering. We do exactly what we did before. We take the application, we want to get it back to some human-readable form of code. We take our Android application, we decompile it, we get it back into Java source, except this time, none of the function names mean anything, the variable names are really confusing, all the program flow is heavily altered and is really hard to follow. What this means is that previously, when it may have only taken us a couple of hours to determine exactly where everything was inside the application, it may now take us weeks, if we even succeed at all. Maybe now we have a sort of vague idea where these things are, but we really don't know how they're being implemented in any detail. It's definitely still possible to gain an understanding of the code, because obviously it functions in exactly the same way that it did before, except now it probably takes hours of pen and paper sort of working out exactly how the whole thing is being followed. It is a really arduous process. In terms of effort by an attacker, I've given this a sort of 5 out of 5. The reason for that being, usually if you're faced with some sort of heavy code obfuscation, it's often easier just to move on than it is to sit there trying to reverse engineer the whole thing. In terms of implementation effort, introduced in MWRP 2.0, I've introduced an implementation effort, which is a sort of perceived effort to implement this hardening control. And our implementation effort for code level obfuscation is really simple, 1 out of 5. And the reason for this being that there are lots of pre-packaged solutions out there that do this kind of thing for you. They're free, it's point and click, it's not hard. So we had a bit of a headache when we were trying to reverse engineer, and we couldn't really understand where the security controls were implemented. So what we want to do is we want to start being more dynamic and really have a look at the application whilst it runs. So we want to escalate our privileges, just like we did before. We download a root exploit, we get a routed device, we run the application, except this time the application crashes. After a little head scratching, we work out that we think there's some sort of root detection that's going on. As an attacker, I have a good idea how that root detection might be implemented, so I start working my way through all of those different ways, modifying the environment that the application is executing within in order to try and get the application to run. This is a blind process. It's also just exhausting. I just have to work through all different ways, and sometimes it may not be possible to know if one of the ways that I patch my environment has actually had an effect on the application or not. It's definitely possible to bypass, which is why I've given it an effort of 4 out of 5 by an attacker, but it is now an increased time cost. An example implementation of how you would implement some sort of root detection would require some amount of custom code that's implemented within your apps. However, this could be as simple as looking for files on the device that are associated with root or root exploits or root packages. For the reason that you need to implement some of your own code, I've given it an effort of 2 out of 5, but it is, or it still can be, simple. So after some time and effort, we've managed to get the application running on a rooted device. We now want to start debugging it. We try and debug it, but the application crashes again. It doesn't reach any of our breakpoints. We can't do any of the seeing how it works while it executes like we did before. Again, we have a good idea how this control might be being implemented, but we have to go through systematically modifying our environment in order to try and get the application to run. It takes a large amount of time, but it's certainly not impossible to bypass. And for that reason, I've given it a 4 out of 5. In terms of an example implementation, there are various ways that you can check whether or not your application is being debugged. You can check if you are the child process of some other process, or you can query the proc file system to see some status about yourself in order to verify whether or not you're being debugged. And again, this will require some degree of custom implementation within an application to identify this, which is why I've given it a difficulty 2 out of 5, like I did in the previous section. So let's say we gave up with debugging, but we made it through the root detection and reverse engineering wasn't very fruitful. We have a rough idea where this application is, or maybe we've worked out the function name, and we're going to try and hook it, and we're going to try and return true and that SSL pinning function that's really causing us a headache. We just want to be able to see the request, modify them, so we want to get rid of SSL pinning. We try and hook the application, just like we did before, using a tool that we downloaded from the internet, such as Substrate or Exposed, but the application crashes again. Again, exactly the same as the previous one. We have to go through either tampering with the binary or modifying our environment in order to get the application to run, hence the effort is 4 out of 5. In terms of implementing this control, it's definitely somewhat harder given the different ways that the different hooking packages are implemented. An example would be, in Android, would be to verify your own class loader, ask the question, who ran me and where did I come from? And for this reason, or because of the reason that there are multiple different packages that operate different ways, we've given an implementation effort of 3 out of 5. So, hooking wasn't really getting us anywhere. We're getting really frustrated now. We've spent all this time modifying our environment to get this application to run. We're just going to start overwriting sections of the binary that we think are related to some security controls causing us hassle. We do this, just like we did the previous step. We run the application, and the application crashes again. The reason why it crashes is because the application is verifying its integrity at runtime. Parts of the application are checking other parts of the application against pre-known values and saying, does this look like how it should look like? And if it doesn't, then I should halt execution. In terms of bypassing this as an attacker, dependent on how it's implemented, it can be really quite hard. If you have multiple of these checks that are happening in your application and they kind of guard one another, then you may have to disable them all simultaneously, and this would be particularly hard for an attacker, particularly if the application is obfuscated. In terms of implementing this kind of protection, it is also definitely very hard. The only reason why I haven't given it a 5 out of 5 is because there are off-the-shelf solutions that you can buy, commercial products, that will offer this kind of protection. And it's definitely a lot more effective on native libraries or iOS applications. Yeah. So we've now gone through our reconnaissance and weaponization again. What has an attacker achieved on our second hardened application? Well, if they made it this far, then they've achieved all the same things that they achieved before. They've learned how the application has its message-level encryption or its crypto routines. They've modified the application, and they're now free to start sending arbitrary requests to the server. If they got this far, then they spent a large amount of time patching their environment, modifying the application in order to get it to run. And the question really is, why bother investing all that time? And this is really the point for this presentation. It's not about introducing these controls makes your application unhackable or hack-proof, because we all know that that's not true and it doesn't exist. But what these controls do is increase the cost effectiveness to attackers beyond which could reasonably be expected of them. Previously, when they could quickly get to those steps where they could conduct application security assessments or web application security assessments, now they have to go through all these hurdles, all these steps to even get to a point where they can identify if your application is vulnerable. And why would they do that? Because particularly if there's a whole bunch of other applications out there which don't have these mechanisms in place. By slowing attackers down in our reconnaissance and weaponization steps, it means that attackers can never get to that position where they can say, oh, this application is vulnerable. It may be, in the case of our mobile server kill chain methodology that I showed you earlier, that we spend all this time and effort, days, weeks, months, getting to the point where we can start assessing the server. Once we get to that point, we realise, oh, there are no vulnerabilities to be had, and this was just all a massive waste of time. And for this reason, it is particularly unattractive to attackers. So at this point, you might be wondering, well, which of these should I implement, or which one of these should people be implementing? In terms of cost effectiveness, code obfuscation is definitely up there. It's very easy to implement and is a real pain, can cause a lot of time and effort on the part of the attackers. The ideal answer is to implement as many as possible. These protections serve to guard one another. For example, if I wanted to get rid of some of the root detection routines that are happening in an application by patching the binary, then the integrity checking that we introduce will stop us from doing that and make the whole thing a lot harder. As many as possible is definitely good. So we have to weigh it up. There are definitely pros and cons to these kind of approach. The pros of implementing these hardening controls and hardening your applications in this way is that you get to defend against all those risks we talked about earlier that OWASP provides. Intellectual property theft by modification of your application, identification of vulnerabilities or vulnerabilities in your server, which ultimately lead to revenue loss or reputation damage. The cons of implementing these protections is that implementing all of them in such a way that an application doesn't crash on legitimate users can definitely sometimes be quite hard, particularly on a platform such as Android, where there are so many different devices and operating system versions. Doing something like tamper-proofing or checking files on the device might not always be 100% effective and may make for a horrible user experience. So hopefully you're thinking about the following things now. What are the impacts of distributing those insufficiently hardened apps? Well, all those business risks that I just described, intellectual property damage, intellectual property theft and reputational damage, and also that point that I made at the beginning about retroactively hardening your apps. Once they're out there and someone's learned about how it works, the damage is already done. How can applications defend themselves against these kind of advanced attacks? Well, they can do so by implementing those protections that I described, that anti-hooking, anti-tamper, and obfuscation. So sorry that was short and sweet, but thanks very much. And do you have any questions? Yeah.
In terms of the defences, are there ones that are more likely to cause instability? Because that's obviously the thing that book hasn't a lot of doing it. They don't want users to have bad time. Are there others
say probably it depends how advanced your root detection methods go. In some cases, you may want to implement really specific root detection methods, like, oh, there's this particular thing in the operating system that I don't like, or I've seen that suspicious, or there's some flag that I've said, oh, there's this weird property in the proc file system, maybe they've patched the kernel module or something, I'm going to flag that as suspicious. It's obviously good if you want to make a really secure app and make sure that you're running on a 100% legit environment, but on many devices where OEM manufacturers can modify those things, then that might cause you a bit of trouble.
So maybe root detection is what it causes.
I would say, in my experience, I think root detection is problematic. And it was also one of the more common ones that we see. Root detection is quite a common protection mechanism seen in applications. Yep.
You were describing a sort of a new trend where because virus writers are trying to actually scrap confidential information directly on the device itself. How you if you put an encrypted file on the device, how can you effectively protect the keys on the application or something like that, because you have encrypted out of it, keeping the information on the device securely so it doesn't get scrapped.
So the question was, how do you secure
Information on the device? So if you go to bank app, you have your bank account number, your name, some other information, and you securely keep that on the device.
So are you talking about sort of within application directories? Or?
Yes, within the application.
Definitely some form of encryption would be the best method of keeping that private. I mean, then if it's stolen, no one's going to find out what's inside. Obviously, for applications that need to run offline all the time, then those keys would have to be in the application and could be pulled out by reverse engineering or something. So I guess the sort of gold standard is to always make sure you have a server or require some server authentication in order to pull down some keys or seed that you can use to unencrypt that information that's being stored there. Does that answer your question?
You sort of say most of the things to try and get your application to fail. And you then pretty obvious something going, with some secure processes being implemented. Is there not an alternative way of actually being silent, but actually logging the attack and then recording that back?
Or warning the server.
Or warning the server to say something's going on. And particularly then, taking information off the device as well, which is probably location information, etc. I know there's probably some ethical issues, but what's the thought?
Absolutely. I mean, that's definitely a good idea. If you're implementing these protections, there's a really good idea to notify your server that, hey, actually people are trying to bypass this, or someone is trying to attack me, therefore you want to be aware of that. However, in terms of letting them then continue with the sort of analysis they were conducting, I guess it is also beneficial to just halt execution entirely. Perhaps halting execution after communicating with the server would be the ideal approach. Then obviously there's some sort of like timing problems there that might occur. It's a balance, I guess. It depends how much you want to know about it compared to how paranoid you are that they're going to find out some secret that you don't want them to know.
I think one of the most useful things is the earlier in that tool chain that you're attacking this, the cheaper the cost effectively usually to do that detection, the more effective it can be, because you stop it before you hit those impacts and risks. So certainly anywhere early in that tool chain around reconnaissance and the initial detection, yeah, absolutely you need to get some kind of awareness there.
Yeah.
You said about checking the routed devices. So if you've been checking if the device is routed anyway, what about with Android banking apps? Some won't run at all, some won't buy. Really, whose decision is it to say if your device is routed or not?
Yeah, I mean, there is obviously a sort of business decision that organisations have to make, because by saying we can't run on rooted devices means you're then cutting out part of your user base. Like you say, some institutions have decided that's a risk that's not worth taking, and some have decided actually we want more people using it and maybe a better user experience. That decision is really just for the people that are developing the applications. In terms of the risk exposed, doing application assessments, a large percentage of the kind of attacks that we carry out usually require rooted access anyway. So although maybe running on a rooted device doesn't necessarily put you immediately at risk, it definitely facilitates further attacks that you previously may not have protected against. All of these methods are sort of a part of a defense in depth approach. You know, it's just about reducing that risk, making it a little bit harder. Yeah.
You mentioned obfuscating the code to make it harder for anyone trying to analyze the source code. Wouldn't that make it harder for anyone working in the program in the future as well?
So the question was, if you didn't hear it, would obfuscating your application code make it harder for people in your own organisation to work on the code? I'd like to say that in most cases, no, because you apply obfuscation to like compiled binaries, not within the source code prior to compiling it. It has the effect that when you attempt to decompile it, the decompilers will then see it in a sort of nonsensical way, rather than having built it in a nonsensical way, compiling it and then decompiling it and it appearing like that.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? No? Thanks very much.